Welcome to Corporate Baggage, where we will help you unpack, repack, and lighten the load. We're your hosts, Whitney Siders and Catie Campbell.
For nearly 40 years, we've been coaches, consultants, and leaders inside organizations and supporting global enterprises and Fortune 500 companies to help make those organizations strong and healthy.
If there's a hot topic in the workplace, you better believe we'll be unpacking it here. Topics like return to office, performance reviews, compensation, nothing is off limits. Like, subscribe, follow us, and drop your baggage in the comments so we can unpack it together and lighten the load.
The only thing that should be in your bag is your paycheck.
Welcome back to the Corporate Baggage podcast. And today we're going to talk about the fourth in a series of topics around the employee life cycle. So we've hit job postings and recruiting. We've talked about interviewing. We've talked about effective onboarding. And today we're going to talk about the tail end of the employee journey, which is offboarding. And so, as always, we're going to help you unpack, repack, and hopefully lighten the load around this topic because it's something that every organization, no matter big, small, government, nonprofit, for-profit, has to deal with, which is the end of somebody's employment with the company. And so it's a complex topic, even though it seems really simplistic, just like onboarding is very nuanced. Mm-hmm. And it's one that's not talked about a lot because it's, I think even in Western business culture, we don't talk about endings and terminations and people leaving as much as we do think about the front end of the journey or while somebody is an employee. So lots to unpack here, Whit.
Yeah, and we'll, as always, we'll hit it from multiple angles, primarily from the organization, leadership end, and then from the individual. But I think one thing that just came to mind as you were saying that was, and I don't think that this is everyone, especially how the workplace has evolved, but I think traditionally, and different generations, I'm sure, think about this, is you don't go into a job, almost like you don't go into a relationship thinking, this is going to end in a year. Now, some you do because you say, I'm going to go, I'm going to get my experience here, I'm going to learn, and I'm using it as a stepping stone. There are definitely jobs like that. And I think a lot of times we go to jobs thinking, not that it's going to be forever, but like this is going to be my place for the foreseeable future. And so you don't, like you said, you don't necessarily think about, I wonder what their offboarding looks like.
No.
Like you would think about, I wonder what their onboarding looks like. So let's pull that open a little.
Well, and nobody would ask that during an interview. Like you don't know it until somebody actually
leaves.
That's
an odd question, right?
Right. But it does, the way that a company offboards its employees for all different reasons of why someone would leave a company really speaks volumes about their culture, both in terms of their leadership culture, but then certainly their view on the employee experience. Because, you know, when we're talking about offboarding, the first thing that comes to mind is the person who is leaving the company, but there's also a huge ripple effect and impact to everybody else who's left on the team and really just the company more generally.
Yeah.
So should we start with where we've seen it go wrong or should we start with where we've seen it go right?
Let's start where it goes right.
Oh,
I think we've been talking.
Let's be positive.
We kind of hit people hard, but let's go.
So I have two personal experiences of where I've seen offboarding be really successful. The first is with a nonprofit that I worked for out in California that would throw a potluck for people who left the organization. Now, as a nonprofit, we weren't paid a ton. We had decent benefits. But the way that they showed employee care and appreciation was not necessarily the bottom line of what ended up in your paycheck, but it was around how they celebrated transitions and milestones. So we celebrated, 5-year anniversaries, 10-year anniversaries, that sort of thing. If somebody had a baby, got married. But the thing that really struck me was that when somebody left, so long as they weren't fired, and there was I think I only remember one person actually being fired while I was there, that when you left, they would have a celebration. So it would be a lunch, everybody would bring something, and everybody would bring like their best dish. It wasn't just like some crappy salad from the grocery store.
Cookies.
No, everybody made something with love. And there would be this whole sort of ritual and celebration around all the things you had accomplished while you were there and really just what you as a person contributed to the ongoing success of the organization. And for me, I was working out there in California, and then we moved at the time to Washington, D.C. And this was way before remote work was like in vogue and a cool thing to do. But they wanted this very progressive organization. They wanted to try it. So they said, you can lead your team from Washington, D.C. When I left that organization, now we're bi-coastal, and there really wasn't, it was kind of difficult to throw a potluck on two different coasts. So it didn't happen. But a year later, I went and ran a marathon out in the same area in California. And they said, well, if you're going to be here, we'll throw you a party. So they threw a potluck a year later. And it was amazing. It was as if I had never left. There were people there that had been hired after I left who were celebrating me. And they're like, we don't even know you, but we've heard a lot of great things. And like, congratulations. We hope you love your new job. It was phenomenal to see that this organization was so committed to making people feel cared for and loved and appreciated on the way out the door.
That doesn't happen these days. I don't see it happen a lot. I think that's a rare occasion and a good example.
Yeah.
Another one on a little, so that to me is like the feel good, personal connection, cultural aspect. There's also the well done job of a leader that's thinking about how do I offboard that really not just honors the person, but also supports them in all of the very functional ways. So a previous client of mine, they would, not everyone, but if they knew that a certain layoff was coming mostly around performance, but other layoffs, they would say, okay, we will be letting you go by the end of the year. As an example, you're going to have the next 2 months, 60 days to be on payroll, full benefits, transitioning projects, everything like that, and you could look for another job in the next 60 days. And so that did a few things. It helped create this opportunity for someone to get a job while they had a job, so financially supporting that, but also giving them time to kind of digest that and not pull the rug out from someone, which can often feel like that when you're, a part of a layoff or something like that, if it is unexpected, which we'll get into in other episodes. So I think that that's a really another great example in a kind of different way, and we'll talk a little bit about how employees react to that too, because I've seen that go two different ways also.
Yeah, layoffs is a huge topic. We're going to have to hit that in another episode. So, we've talked about a couple of things that make offboarding really successful. So we've talked about like recognition, celebration, and then what you're talking about, that I call it the grace period, when someone's going to either be terminated or laid off. And it's usually not being fired for doing something nefarious. It's usually it's underperformance, or
it's not in the right role.
It's not in the right role, or
good person.
It really is a reduction in force. It's it's a cost-cutting exercise. But a grace period to still have the financial security, and it really allows the organization, not just that team member, but really the entire team, to transition work, to transition projects, as you said, and to give, I don't know, it's a difficult thing to find another job, right? We've talked about that in previous episodes. And so giving somebody a little bit of like the financial stability and a bit of
I think it normalizes it a little bit.
And also
It makes it not this weird thing.
Because there's such a negative connotation to being laid off, even if it's just a reduction in force. It's like a business cost-cutting exercise. It has nothing to do with your performance. It doesn't matter. I think people take a lot of pride in their employment and where they work. Most people care a lot about the places where they work. They care about their team member. They care about their customers. So having that kind of season to be able to find the next role, to be able to exit with, I would say, dignity, as opposed to in defeat or with your head hung, is a big thing. So those are absolutely critical. But what about things like just sort of transitioning the work? Because somebody has to usually pick up the slack. Very rarely do we see that someone's role is eliminated, the work still exists. Like the work doesn't just magically go away. Or if you just leave because you found another job in a different company, the work has to go somewhere. So, let's talk a little bit about like really effective transitions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part, no matter how the offboarding is happening. And that I don't think it's kind of similar to onboarding in a way where if there's not clarity, it's done the way that it's always been done, which isn't necessarily always setting people up for success. So not only is that person feeling however they're feeling, but the team and the morale is impacted, which is even harder to bring back to either your central point or where you want it to be.
Right.
So the transitioning, in my view, really needs it comes back to clarity and having alignment on like what is our process, what is our approach here, what does that look like, and so when it goes well. I say this laughing because this typically doesn't exist, but you could work towards it. So the person, every individual should have some sort of idea of, yes, we talk a lot about what good looks like in their role, but also a series of things that they're tracking, that they're working on. So not a minute by minute, hour by hour, play by play of what they do every day, not a task list, but here are the major projects I'm working on that if I left, I would need to transition. It's kind of like thinking about death and your will and things like that. Like no one really wants to do it, but like how much easier is it for you and your well, if you die, you're gone. Sorry, we're talking about death today. But I just think I don't know why this came to my mind, but a great analogy is like life insurance and a will.
Yeah.
So I know very different, but your family doesn't have to deal with that if you have all of that set up. That's a lot of work if you don't have it set up.
Yeah.
Similar to if you're transitioning from a job. I know very different, but you're leaving and you have no documentation. It's all in your head. What are they supposed to do? You're then supposed to, over the next 2 weeks, if we're lucky, get all of that out of your head. We're talking about sometimes people who have been there for 10, 20, 30 years of history that have nothing documented. I know you've seen that a lot too, as much as me.
Yeah, but also it just makes me think of, I mean, you and I have both worked in places before where the offboarding sometimes is non-existent.
Yeah.
So you could give your 2 weeks notice, then they go, yeah, that's okay. You're done.
Yes.
And they'll
yes.
cut off all of your communications. They shut down your computer and they say, bye-bye. So there is no transition. There's no way to be able to transfer, here's my passwords
through
for certain things.
conversations. Yeah.
No. So
either that's documented or not. And even documentation isn't going to help fully. It's better than nothing. But I know what you and I have seen is that that's super rare that people have anything documented like that.
Nobody, I mean, I really don't think that most people do.
No.
And if they do, it's a rare case and wow, what a blessing. But that's just not realistic. And so the idea of the 2 weeks notice was really around being able to do transitions. But for whatever reason, there is a growing trend of we're just going to cut everything off and we'll figure it out when you're gone. That's problematic for a number of reasons. There's a recent example of a client of mine, I think they're still wrestling with this, had an issue with an employee who left or was going to be fired. I'm still fuzzy on that detail. It's inconsequential, but when they left, they set a bunch of passwords and they basically locked their computer out to where IT is still trying to figure out how to break into it. And they were in charge of critical processes and systems that they knew. I don't know if the business was as clear about all the things that they were really overseeing, controlling. So it's created a work stoppage and a ton of time, effort, rework, and they're probably going to lose data and information, or it's going to be obsolete by the time they finally, unlock this computer. The transition wasn't set up. It was not, and it was done very abruptly. So it was jarring for this individual. And so they found a way to be able to say, oh, okay, if this is how this is how it's going to be, I'll show you. But similarly, it's been jarring for the rest of the team who's now scrambling to try and figure out how to pick up the pieces because, and they weren't involved in the decision for this person to leave, but now they're the ones left holding the bag. And it's really unfortunate.
I think that's a good example of needing to really think about risk in this as well. Because similar to going into a relationship or marriage, you're not thinking that the worst case scenario or where that person is going to be at that time and really thinking about it more as a business transaction and protecting yourself legally, and how do we make this the most smooth? You don't know where people are or how they're going to react. You could think this person loves the business. They've been here for a long time, or they would never do that. One, you don't know how they're going to react to that news. You don't know what else could be going on for them in their life or that had been going on in the business that you didn't know about. So there's a lot of things like that example, or even what we've seen as of recently, the trend of recording layoffs or recording that conversation of being let go. I always tell clients that I would assume you just go in assuming that conversation is being recorded and it's going to be posted on the internet.
Right.
So assume that this is going to hit your brand. How do you want that to look? Because it might be.
I mean, we talked in a previous episode, we talked a lot about when you're onboarding somebody, from the time that the recruitment process starts, that you're already kind of tipping your hand as an organization about what your leadership brand is, what your employer brand is. The way that you offboard people is very similar. So does everybody need to do pomp and circumstance and fanfare?
Yeah.
No, but do we need to think about how we're exiting this person, whether it's because they decided to leave or we're asking them to leave? What is the good, right, and decent thing to do? And the good, right, and decent thing to do is to not ghost them, which is what this whole, like, we shut off all your email communications and Slack and whatever you use to communicate, and we just kind of cut you off. We hamstring, and now we're going to hamstring the rest of
Everyone
the team
else
to try and pick up the pieces. And oh, by the way, we're not going to pay them more to do that. We're just going to make it very difficult for them. The other thing that we haven't talked about, but what happens when these abrupt exits happen, is that the communication is really minimal and it's often underwhelming and incomplete. So somebody leaves. Now, if someone gets fired because they're doing something terrible, I'm totally fine with someone saying, we've had to let Whitney go. She's no longer works here. Here's what to do if there are questions or what have you with her work.
Sure.
And we will follow up with you on transitioning some of her duties, or we'll talk to you about, backfilling her later. Nobody really needs to know why Whitney got fired. In fact, most people probably already knew if you were an underperformer or if you did something really terrible, right? So you don't need to go any further into that. But it's when somebody puts in their 2 weeks notice or what have you, and they're going to leave, and it's like, Whitney no longer works here. And everyone goes, Whitney was like our best coach. She was our best consultant.
Because they wonder if that other scenario happened.
Right.
Yeah.
So they go, well, gosh, if Whitney was our best, what does that mean for me?
Right.
Am I going to get let go? What happened with Whitney? I can't contact her now because all of her communications have been turned off. Who's going to pick up her work? What's going to happen? And it creates now an undercurrent and a story and a buzz and fear that's inappropriate, and it's really not necessary. If you're leaving because you found another job, great.
That should be celebrated.
That should be celebrated. That means, as all the great work that you did should be celebrated. Hey, we're going to give you a couple days, a couple weeks, whatever it needs to be, to transition your work, and we're going to say good luck to you.
Right.
It is not that hard to do that. It's like the polite thing that I'm surprised sometimes in American business in particular that we don't do that, because we tend to be overly polite, not to the point of Canadian polite, but like American level polite, that we should just say, okay, thank you. Even if behind our back, we're like, man, dang it,
That
Whitney.
sucks. Yeah.
Why did you leave? That sucks. Like, we needed you on this project. It's so the undercurrent and the ripple effect it has left on the team can be like doubly damaging, because now you've got all these people who are going, well, what happened? I don't know. And they're spending time doing what? Talking about why Whitney left, as opposed to doing their work and focusing on producing things for the company. They're thinking about this whole story around Whitney. And if we were doing this offboarding in a way that really, I think, took care of the human side of business and was honoring the person, no matter the circumstance, you wouldn't have that happen. That just wouldn't be the case.
Well, I think it's just that. I think it's, at the end of the day, as humans, we want to feel like there's some sort of appreciation. Honored might be a strong word, but appreciation, right, for the work that's been done.
Yeah.
And again, we're setting aside, like, you broke the law, you broke the rules, like, those people, different
That's
camp,
different. Yeah.
Right? So honored, appreciated. I want to feel like this process is fair and just. At the end of the day, if those two things exist in however you play out your offboarding in your organization, that's a win. Because that sends a message not just to you as the individual leaving and for the brand to continue to be positive, but for everyone inside, because you know what they're thinking? What's going to happen when I leave? Is that going to be me? Because that happens. And then the fallout, of which organizations often aren't thinking about, is when this person leaves, you should already know, where are my flight risks? Which conversations do I need to have before, during, and after? What does that look like?
Yep.
What's the additional fallout? How is that going to impact, the workload and the clients and the customers? What does that, thinking 10 steps ahead and first focusing on your people.
Well, we both worked for Andrew, who's one of our bosses.
Shout out, Andrew.
Shout out, Andrew Friedman. He used to say on a consistent basis, none of us are going to work here forever, which I loved because
it normalized that, which we talked about
totally.
today. Yeah.
Totally. And so if all leaders have that thinking that for 99% of workers, well, we're all going to die at some point. So we're not going to be there forever. No one's going to be in a business forever. So offboarding should be something that's planned for as much as recruiting, hiring, training, supporting, promoting, all the kinds of things that we do in the rest of the employee life cycle. Offboarding should be a process that is planned for and should be deliberate. It shouldn't be okay, so-and-so put in their 2 weeks notice. Now what do we do?
There's a strategy around it.
Yeah.
And there are different scenarios, right? The common ones that we could plan for, of which we've talked about. So when it's the best case scenario and people put in their 2 weeks, we can plan for some of that transition of work, like I was talking about a little earlier.
Right.
Sometimes that doesn't happen. So what happens in those cases where, I'll give you an example, in the best way, the positive version of offboarding I talked about, giving 60 days for this person to find a new job. There was a couple scenarios with this client where that worked really well and it was celebrated and it was great. And there was one where this person decided to say, great, that's awesome. And then they went home, digested it, and decided to just no show, no call on Monday.
Did they keep paying them?
So that's not a part of the deal.
No, it's not.
This client is amazing. And they actually said, obviously they reached back out and said, okay, this was not a part of the discussion, because they did verify, like, you have 60 days and it means you need to come to work. They said, so you have until Wednesday. This was Monday. You have until Wednesday to come into work, and you could they still gave them another chance. And they said, or you can terminate now.
Yeah.
And they said, I'm going to terminate now. So they really still gave them the choice.
Okay.
And it was a very, I think very lenient and positive experience. Now, did that turn out the way that either party expected or wanted? Probably no. But I think they handled it appropriately. The organization handled it appropriately, to be clear. Yeah. So you're talking about when it didn't go well, like I know the example that you're talking about. Let's pair that out a little bit more. So when we've talked about times where we've left organizations and it hasn't gone well, different organizations for different reasons. Do you want to share any of those? I'm happy to share one.
Well, trying to think. There's one where I left and, obviously was like celebrated in a big way. They're an organization that we're both familiar with. Their MO was, if you give in your 2 weeks, you're done. They also did layoffs that way, which was a lot of fun too. That, if you came to work and your Outlook or your Slack or what have you didn't work anymore, you kind of knew the writing was on the wall.
Or the classic, there's a 15-minute meeting on your calendar with HR.
So I saw a video on social media this past week with a woman who talked about that it was their company's policy to, when you were going to get laid off, they would cut off your communications, and then they would put a 15-minute meeting on your calendar with your manager and HR, which is pretty standard.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's not,
and legally the right thing to do, by the way, having two people in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, that part is. Okay. So I totally agree with that. Right. And it is very much like, you're no longer employed here. Here's what needs to happen next. It's very basic and straight to the point. But this woman talked about how everybody in the company tried to log into work one day, and nobody's communications were working. So everybody thought that they got fired, got laid off. But she said it was, now this is where some leaders have a real big allergy to what I'm about to say, which is this woman said it was very traumatic because now everybody thought they were laid off. We didn't have a way to really reach out and talk to each other because almost all of us use the internal communication systems to do so. And using the word traumatic or trauma, I know that triggers some people who are, not strong enough to handle it because they don't understand that when you work in a company and you see lots of rounds of layoffs, or, I really feel at the moment for people who work in the tech industry because it is every day. Every day. I actually have a Google alert for layoffs or possible layoffs. It's every day that they know that it's coming. And in certain states in the United States, you have to, as a company, signal to the state that where you're headquartered that, hey, or where the location is, we're going to lay off 10% of our workforce or whatever. It's the law, which is a knowable thing. It's something that people can find out about. So it'll say, X company is set to lay off 10% of its workforce. Well, now I'm going to be sitting there going, oh my gosh, is it me? And it is a little bit like whiplash. And when you're in a time where a lot of people are struggling with the economy, a lot of people are struggling with the price of gas and groceries and housing shortages and go on and on, right? It's very difficult. So there is a collective trauma that people have, and they're sort of like walking on eggshells. Like, am I going to be next? Does it really matter if I'm a high performer? Because if you listen to some of these videos that people will post when they're getting laid off, it'll go, oh, it wasn't for Catie, it wasn't for performance, you're a great performer. It's like, well, so then what's the point? Right? So it's causing this layer of unrest in the workforce that's really, really challenging. So I really feel for people that they have a consistent fear of showing up to work one day and seeing that everything's turned off, or going, I'm trying to reach out and talk to so-and-so and they're not answering. It's because their communications have been cut off because they've been laid off or whatever. It's just, it's kind of a weird time. And the offboarding, we'll talk about layoffs in a different episode, but the offboarding experience for people has not been really clean and I think thoughtfully designed, like we've talked about, when it works really well. And so, people are just kind of sitting around like waiting for that. And it's really sad, but it also takes away from the focus of what we're paying them to do, which is work in the business.
Right. Yeah. One last final thing to say on offboarding, because we will talk more about layoffs, is to pull this together. I think the theme, not only ideas on how to do it well and when it doesn't go well, but the mindset for the individual of knowing that I hesitate to say the cliche version of everyone's replaceable, but you're replaceable.
Right.
And nothing lasts forever. So if you go into that knowing, okay, this organization does have strong values, does have a plan for offboarding, or at least has the structure around some of that, then you know that if that ever happens, it will be a positive, at least not horrible experience. So your mindset going into that, even if there are layoffs all the time, is, okay, I have a plan. I have an idea. I'll be okay. Versus the feeling of, when's the shoe going to drop? What's going to happen? I'm uneasy all the time because you can't work sustainably like that. So I think it's important to pull back to what is in your control or influence, and that is heavily your mindset around that.
And for the company, the organization, the leadership side of this is offboarding your employees is a process that you can easily design.
Yep.
If you want help with us, give us a call, because we've done this before for people.
A lot.
And not enough, honestly. I think there's more that can be done with companies really thinking through what is the end of life cycle experience we want people to have. Because if you know now, or if you weren't thinking about it before, you should know now, it has a significant impact on the remaining workforce. And it's important to make sure that those people are still focused on doing the things that make the business money, or it lets the operations go. And knowing that the offboarding process and execution of it is just as important to your employer brand as what you go to market with when you're trying to bring people in the door.
Cheers to offboarding.
Cheers to that.
Thanks for listening today. If you have some corporate baggage you want to unpack or something you're taking away from the conversation, drop it in the comments.
Please find our social links in the description, and we'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone that you think it could help too.